Welcome back to the channel. Today, I want to tell you a story that I never thought I would have the courage to share. My name is Emma. I am 30 years old, and 3 years ago, I made what I believed was the most loving decision of my life. I gave up my job for my husband. At the time, I thought I was choosing love, marriage, and our future together. I thought I was being a good wife. I thought that if I sacrificed something important to me, my husband would appreciate it forever. But today, I know that I made a terrible mistake. Not because I loved him, but because I slowly gave up myself for someone who eventually decided that I was no longer part of his future. Before I met Daniel, I had a life I was proud of. I worked for a small company in the city, and although my salary wasn't huge, I loved what I did. I had worked hard to get that position. Every morning, I woke up early, prepared my coffee, put on my clothes, and walked to work with a feeling of purpose. I had dreams. I wanted to become a manager one day. I wanted to save enough money to buy my own apartment. I wanted to travel. I wanted to become better at my job. I was not rich, but I was independent, and I was proud of that. Then Daniel entered my life. When I first met him, he seemed like the kind of man I had always dreamed about. He was caring, confident, funny, and incredibly attentive. He remembered small things I told him. He would call me after work just to ask how my day had gone. When I was sick, he came to my apartment with medicine and food. He made me feel safe. After almost a year together, he proposed to me. I said yes. I was 27 years old, and I honestly believed I had found the person I would spend the rest of my life with. Our wedding day was beautiful. I remember looking at Daniel as we stood together and thinking, this is it. This is the beginning of the life I've always wanted. During the first year of our marriage, everything seemed perfect. We rented a nice apartment. We cooked dinner together. We went out on weekends. We talked about having children someday. We talked about buying a house. We talked about growing old together. Then, slowly, things began to change. Daniel started getting more responsibilities at work. He often came home exhausted and complained about the pressure. One night, he sat beside me and said, "Emma, I don't know how much longer I can keep doing everything." I asked him what he meant. He told me that his job required more of his time and that he needed someone to take care of things at home. Then he looked at me and said, "Why don't you leave your job? I make enough money for both of us." I laughed at first because I thought he was joking. I told him that I loved my job. He said, "I know, but think about us. You could have more time for yourself. You wouldn't have to wake up early every morning. You could take care of the house, and I could focus on work. It would make our lives easier." He wasn't forcing me. He never said, "You have to quit." Instead, he made it sound like an act of love. He told me that he would take care of everything. He promised that I would never have to worry about money. He said, "We're a team, Emma. What's mine is yours." Those words convinced me. I spent several nights thinking about it. I was afraid to leave my job, but I also wanted to support my husband. I thought marriage meant making sacrifices, so one morning I walked into my manager's office and handed in my resignation. My manager looked surprised. She asked me if I was sure. I told her I was. She reminded me that I had worked hard to build my career and that I had a lot of potential. I smiled and said, "I just want to focus on my marriage." She wished me luck. When I walked out of the building that afternoon, I looked back at the office where I had spent so many years. I felt sad, but I also felt excited. I believed I was starting a new chapter. I went home and told Daniel. He hugged me tightly and said, "You won't regret this, I promise." For a while, I believed him. I cleaned the apartment. I cooked his favorite meals. I organized our bills and made sure everything at home was ready when he came back. I thought I was helping him succeed. At first, he appreciated everything. He would kiss me and say, "You're the best wife in the world," but after a few months, those words became less frequent. Daniel started coming home later. Sometimes he didn't even tell me where he was. If I asked, he would say, "Work." I didn't want to be the suspicious wife, so I trusted him. I had given him my trust completely. Then I started noticing other changes. He began spending more time on his phone. He would turn the screen away whenever I entered the room. He became irritated when I asked simple questions. One evening, I asked him if something was wrong between us. He looked at me and said, "Nothing is wrong. You're just overthinking everything because you're home all day." That sentence hurt more than he probably realized. I had never thought of myself as someone without a life, but suddenly I started feeling like I was becoming invisible. My friends were busy with their careers. Some had been promoted, others were starting businesses. When they asked me what I was doing, I would simply say, "I'm taking care of the house." Sometimes I felt embarrassed, even though I knew there was nothing wrong with being a homemaker. The problem was that I had stopped doing anything for myself. My savings were slowly disappearing. I had some money left from before I quit, but I wasn't earning anymore. Daniel paid for everything, and at first that seemed normal, but then arguments started. Whenever we disagreed, he would say things like, "You don't understand how hard I work," or "I'm the one paying for everything." The first time he said it, I was shocked. I reminded him that leaving my job had been a decision we made together. He replied, "You chose to quit." I stared at him. Those 4 words changed something inside me. You chose to quit. Suddenly, I realized that the promise he had made when I left my job was disappearing. He had told me that we were a team. Now he was talking as if my decision had been mine alone. I tried to ignore it. I told myself every marriage has difficult periods. I thought things would get better. But they didn't. Daniel became colder. He stopped asking about my day because apparently my days were no longer interesting. I started feeling lonely inside my own marriage. Then one Friday evening, something happened that I will never forget. Daniel came home early. He didn't say hello. He walked into the bedroom, packed a few things into a bag, and came back into the living room. I asked him what he was doing. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. "Emma, I think we need to talk." My heart immediately started beating faster. He sat down and said, "I don't think this marriage is working anymore." I couldn't understand what I was hearing. I asked him if we could fix it. I asked if he was unhappy. I asked if he wanted counseling. He remained silent for a few seconds and then said, "I don't love you the way I used to." I felt as if the room had suddenly become silent. I couldn't move. I couldn't even cry. I just stared at him. Then I asked the question I was terrified to ask. "Is there someone else?" Daniel didn't answer. He looked away. That was all the answer I needed. There was someone else. Someone who had entered his life while I was at home, believing we were building a future together. I asked him how long he had been thinking about leaving. He said, "A few months." A few months. While I was preparing his meals, waiting for him to come home, supporting his career, and believing I was protecting our marriage, he had already been preparing to walk away. Then he said something that broke my heart. "You'll be fine. You're young. You can find another job." I looked at him and almost laughed because I couldn't believe how easily he said it. Find another job, as if I had simply paused my career for a weekend. I had been away from the workplace for years. My experience was becoming outdated. My savings were almost gone. And the man who had promised to take care of me was now telling me that I would have to take care of myself. Daniel left the apartment that night. I sat alone in the living room until the sun came up. I kept looking around at the home we had built together. Every object reminded me of him. the sofa where we had watched movies, the kitchen where I had cooked for him, the photographs on the wall. Everything suddenly felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. For several days, I barely left the apartment. I cried. I blamed myself. I wondered if I had been a bad wife. Then one morning, I walked into the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror, and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I whispered, "Where did you go, Emma?" That question changed everything. I realized that Daniel had left me, but I had left myself long before he did. I had abandoned my dreams. I had stopped building my career. I had stopped saving money. I had stopped developing my skills. I had made one person the center of my entire existence, and when he walked away, I had nothing left except memories. That day, I opened my old laptop. I updated my resume. It was difficult. I had to explain the gap in my employment. I sent applications to company after company. Most never replied. Some rejected me immediately. One interviewer looked at my resume and asked, "Why have you been unemployed for so long?" I wanted to cry, but instead I took a breath and told the truth. I left my career to support my marriage. The interviewer nodded and asked, "And why do you want to come back now?" I smiled and said, "Because I finally understand that supporting someone should never mean abandoning myself." A week later, they offered me a position. It wasn't my old job, it wasn't the salary I used to have, but when I received my first paycheck, I held it in my hands and cried. I wasn't crying because of the money, I was crying because, for the first time in years, I felt independent again. I started rebuilding my life slowly. I learned new skills. I made new friends. I started saving. I began making plans that belonged only to me. I even started dreaming again. Several months later, Daniel called me. He wanted to see me. I agreed. We met at the same cafe where we had once celebrated our anniversary. He looked different. He told me that he regretted leaving. He said the relationship he had chosen after me had failed. He said he had realized that he had made a terrible mistake. Then he said, "Emma, I want us to try again." For a moment, I felt my old emotions coming back. A part of me wanted to believe him, but then I remembered the woman I had been when he left. I remembered sitting alone in that apartment, wondering how I would survive. I remembered his words, "You chose to quit." I looked at him and said, "Daniel, I don't hate you. I don't even regret loving you, but I regret losing myself for you." He lowered his eyes. I continued, "When I gave up my job, I thought I was proving how much I loved you. But now I understand that love should never require one person to disappear." He asked me if I could ever forgive him. I told him, "I already have, but forgiveness doesn't mean going back." Then I stood up and walked away. That was the last time I ever saw him. Today, I am 30 years old. My life isn't perfect, but it belongs to me again. I have my own career, I have my own savings, I have goals, I have dreams, and most importantly, I know who I am. Looking back, I don't regret loving Daniel. I regret believing that loving him meant sacrificing every part of myself. If you are listening to my story, and you are thinking about giving up your career, your education, your dreams, or your independence for someone you love, please think carefully. Supporting your partner is beautiful. Building a family is beautiful. Making sacrifices for the people you love can be beautiful too. But there is a difference between sacrifice and losing yourself completely. Never build your entire life around one person. Keep something that belongs to you. Keep learning. Keep your skills alive. Keep your friendships. Keep your dreams, and if you choose to stay home for your family, make sure that decision is truly yours and that you still have a voice in your own future. Because people can change, relationships can change, circumstances can change, but you should never abandon yourself just because you are afraid of losing someone else. I once thought losing my husband was the worst thing that could happen to me. I was wrong. The worst thing was losing myself while trying to keep him. And the best thing that happened afterward was finding myself again.